Hi, all. Thanks for coming and thanks to Civic Labs for bringing us together. Our goal today is to discuss ethical AI in a practical, actionable way. This conversation is just the start of developing a public definition that Civic Labs will stand behind and advocate for government agencies to put into practice. Today, I'm excited to introduce you all to six of our panelists that are bringing their unique perspectives to this discussion. I'd like each panelist to briefly introduce themselves, and I'll start with Owen.
Hi, so I'm Owen Baden. I'm CTO at CivicLabs and CivicActions. Um, I worked on CivicActions AI policy and engaged with a lot of the issues around this as part of that. And yeah, I've been using AI a lot myself, primarily finding it helpful for synthesis, doing some research, ideation. So definitely has some really exciting things going on, but I also spend a lot of time thinking and worrying about all the ways that it can go wrong. So yeah, thank you.
I hear that. Thanks, Owen. Bennett, let's hand it over to you.
Thanks. My name is Bennett Gebkin. I'm the CTO for Huntridge Labs, and I have a long history of working on AI on really from the implementation side as well as the policy side. I started out working more in the machine learning area and then expanding more into OCRs, multimodal LLMs, and other technology related to AI. And a lot of my background is shaped and influenced by the fact that I started out my career in the infantry in the Marines. And so I tend to bring more of a focus on the outcomes or the downstream effect as we work on building AI that will support the public good.
Awesome. We're grateful to have you here. Thanks, Bennett. Jaime.
Hi, everyone. Jaime Gracia with the Wolverine Group. I am a former federal procurement executive. I did that at three agencies, now back with Wolverine Group, leading our consulting practices on how to acquire and use AI in procurement and how to safely and effectively use AI for procurement, and also leading our training programs for upskilling the workforce on effective and safe use of AI and generative AI in particular for procurement. So that's a little bit about what we're doing at Wolverine Group. Thank you.
Thanks, Jaime. Ron, over to you. Ron, over to you.
Hey, good afternoon, folks. My name is Ron Jones, CEO of G2X. We help government contractors, primarily go-to-market professionals, make better decisions when it comes to what opportunities to go after. I've, for nearly 20 years, built and sold large enterprise applications into the federal government myself. As of the past couple of years, have been very heavily steeped in the world of building software with AI and using AI for internal operations and things like that. So for us, and especially for our customers, right, it's important that everything that AI produces is verifiable, auditable, and explainable, right? So very relevant conversation for us.
Thanks for being here, Ron. Danielle.
So happy to be here having this conversation. I can tell you right now, in all the regulatory reform that I'm involved in, and it's the largest in a 40-year career history with the Revolutionary Far Overhaul, ethics is not mentioned, So this is a great conversation about guardrails, and I'm just excited to bring my experiences being on the buying side for technology for many, many years as a practitioner, working closely with designers and architects of this technology, and now managing the deployment of a complete overhaul in regulation and the way we think about people and technology. So I just want to echo excitement and enthusiasm. The workforce is exactly where they need to be right now. What an amazing moment to be in work as we intersect with artificial intelligence. Thank you for having me.
We're grateful that you're here, Danielle. And Joel, to round out our panelists.
Thank you for having me. I'm Joel Natividad. I'm the co-CEO of that here, and we've been doing open data, the fuel that a lot of these models are training on for about 15 years now, and been heavily involved in the standards bodies, specifically for the Evidence Act, the DCAT US3 standard, and even the croissant machine learning metadata standard, which should hopefully help these models train on the data in a verifiable, reproducible, auditable way. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for those intros. I'm really excited to get into the conversation today. And to kick things off, I just wanted to sort of ground us and like the philosophy that, to be ethical, to qualify as a moral agent, an entity must possess consciousness, intent, and free will. And AI has none of these. It doesn't care whether it helps or harms. It simply maximizes a reward function, not navigating moral dilemmas. So ethical AI, it's fundamentally a human construct. And when we treat AI as if it truly understands or enacts ethics, we risk anamorphizing it, like turning into something human that it's not, which can open doors to dangerous policies, gaps, and misunderstandings. And Bennett, like the other day when we were prepping for this panel, I know you had this analogy that you used to explain AI. I'd love it if you'd share it with this audience today before we dig into the questions. So I'll hand that over to you.
Sure. And I'm going to stick with a non-military related analogy. So one of the analogies I think that everyone can really relate to here is when, an activity almost everyone does on a almost daily basis is driving a vehicle. Vehicles are extremely dangerous. Unfortunately, they remain extremely dangerous. There's a massive amount of research from Department of Transportation and other regulatory bodies and industry that go into trying to reduce the harm that can be caused by vehicles. But it is something that we've had to learn to incorporate and manage the risk in our daily lives. When there's a vehicle crash, no one says a car was being unethical, that it, jumped the guardrails and, caused some sort of damage, either to, loss of life or, a damage to a person or just, property damage. Everyone always has to consider what safety features. A key change that happened to vehicles was adding seatbelts, making sure that we could have that additional safety feature. A wide range of safety features have been added over time, and the focus has always been on the safety, recognizing that cars do not have agency. They don't choose when to do something. And so we have to reduce the potential harm and focus on building safe guardrails that can help us manage the risks. And so when we look at AI, I think we really have to focus on a similar approach where we really have to look at guardrails. Do we have the right safety features? And are we planning for the right safety features so we can mitigate those potential risks? And if we bring that perspective, I think we can focus on something that we can all agree on, that we don't want unsafe things being let loose in any environment.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Bennett, for sharing that. And I'm hoping to not talk a lot today other than this intro and outro, but I do want to share like this really story. It's an experience that Owen and I had. And so when you were talking about seatbelts, it made me think of Waymo, right? These self-driving cars. And Owen and I had this experience where we were in Austin and it was raining and the Waymo was using its windshield wipers. And I was like, why? Right? Like the car doesn't need to use the windshield wipers to drive probably, but it was a perceived safety thing for us, right? So like safety isn't just those things to make us safe, but it's the perception. Like when elevators were first introduced, the reason why there was a person on the elevator to run the elevator was to calm the nerves of people who were so unfamiliar with these elevators to make them feel more safe and more calm. And so like sometimes it goes beyond just those actual safety features, but to help the people who are using those tools feel safe as well. So let's dig into the questions here. So for question, with AI tools, they're evolving at like literal breakneck speed. I feel like I can't even keep up with all the changes that are happening. Um, and regulation, it's slower. It's still lagging behind. And we have to face a tough truth. Like we can't rely on AI to be ethical on its own for the things that we've talked about. So who needs to step up right now, and what safeguards really matter to protect the most vulnerable, especially as government agencies rush in to bring AI into the fold? So I'd love to hand this over to Owen as one of our first panelists to speak on this topic.
Yeah, so I think you mentioned this as well, but I think it's primarily about people. I think people think AI, it's a technical thing, therefore it must be like a technology thing that people who know technology need to worry about and think about. But like a lot of things, like cars are technology, but what happens when a car crashes, it's not a technology thing, it's a people thing, right? Seatbelts, very simple invention. Seatbelts were around for a long time before they were ubiquitous and used by everyone, right? And so I think we need to think about like how people practice AI usage in their day to day. Like how do we have a combination of some clear rules and some training, and also have the tools that make doing the right thing the easy thing, right? Like how can we make it easy to make sure that you're paying attention to the things you need to pay attention to, and really certainly in the type of work we do, I think it's really it's a design question, right? Primarily, and design in like the big design sense, not visual design necessarily, but like really thinking about like what's the purpose of what we're doing. What do users want to do? What's their objective? What are the ways that they could be supported or harmed by what we do here? And thinking about all the things that could go wrong, feedback, testing. How will we know if something's going wrong that we didn't think of, right? Like those are the things that often go the worst. It's like there's some side effect that you just didn't even occur to you, and that can end up harming people. And so really, I think it takes a lot of thought and a lot of structured process to just think through and really dig deep into what it is that you're building or doing with AI. And that those things, the content of that, I think, is a lot of things that people probably will have come across if they're interested in this issue. There's obviously fairness and bias questions around, especially around LLMs, and how to mitigate those if they're present, which you should always assume they are going to be present anytime it's trained on real life data. Transparency, I think that is a huge one. Do people know that AI is being used? Do they know, even if they know an AI is being used, do they know how that AI was trained? At CivicActions, we're really big around, open source and the importance of open source. And a lot of AIs are open in that you can, the tools are there, but none of the data is open. And so really for, truly open AI, for truly AI that is transparent, we're pretty strong believers that like the data that the AI was trained on, that should also be available. If you're going to release an AI into the public, release the data too. Explainability, this is an area where it does get more technical, right? How do you actually understand why an AI reached a specific conclusion? It's quite difficult. Some would say pretty impossible with the current LLMs. There is work being done on it. It's going to be more gestural, I think, for a while until technology advances further. And then other things that probably will come up again and again in our conversation today. So, human in the loop is a common term. So that means having a human be responsible, accountable for decisions, and either supervising the AI and approving or disapproving what it does, or having the AI provide like a backstop to their work, right? So it's giving them input, it's giving them like, oh, you missed something. Oh, what about this? Oh, this one's this one's a high risk thing. You should pay attention to this. So those kind of things can be helpful. And And then, there's a lot of questions about the data. What data is it trained on? Is that there privacy issues around that? Is there copyright issues around that? And then, there's the broader AI safety concerns around, is the AI behaving in ways that we want it to behave? So there's it's a really broad topic, and I think, really the main thing is to go into it with an open perspective and like really try and, get into the mind of your users and like what do they need? What's the impact of what the AI is doing on them, right? Like how can we mitigate that? How can we anticipate what might be happening?
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Owen. +1 to keeping things out in the open. I'd also love to hear from Danielle on this same question. As AI's, at this breakneck speed and we're lagging with regulations, what safeguards, right? Like what safeguards do we need to consider?
Yeah, and I really loved something Owen touched on, which is actually getting back to the end user. So the whole purpose in government right now of reforming regulation, streamlining it, centralizing it, plain languageizing it, was to cut out overly prescriptive things. And I just find this concept fascinating for multiple career fields, and certainly with AI, right? And how we're reinforcing technology to enable outcomes-oriented decision making or prescribe things. And at least in federal acquisition, which is my space, we're really thinking more about validating requirements on the front end and making sure that we're going out to talk to end users. I don't see why this concept couldn't apply when we're talking about rolling out AI in the same concept in federal acquisition. We have to be very careful not to get in our own way, not to prescribe policy that is limiting. And so the guardrails are really going to come down to not just how it's designed, which I do not claim to be a designer or builder of the tools, but downstream, however it's rolling out imperfectly as it is, right? This is the Wild West right now. Making sure that there's guardrails and gates along the way that are informed by the users that we know about. So there's a couple of things that are going to dovetail. From my perspective, we have to understand the people, particularly the buyers of this technology, and what skills they need to understand generally, foundationally, what AI is and what the powers it offers, so that they're amplifiers in a good way. But we also have to understand policy and words and the things that guide and make those sets of workforces compliant. And so I know we're going to get into this more in the next question. I don't want to take away from other folks, but thinking about technology as a person in the sense that it's a life cycle. We're lifelong learners. Technology is going to evolve and iterate as well, even though I know we don't want to anthropomorphize it. But risk right now in procurement is handled and addressed in that way. For example, in supply chain risk, cybersecurity risk, why not AI? Why isn't AI called out and thought of from a lifecycle management perspective, and so that we test and get that user feedback? So I'll stop there, but that's where I think a lot of themes are in what Owen is talking about, some of the specifics and how we can get there. And it's going to take a lot of really smart folks in the room on all sides of the development and the deployment of the technology to get us there.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Danielle. And, when we think about where to begin, a lot of this can happen in procurement, right? Like when we're procuring contracts and vendors and support. So our next question here is like, when evaluating AI tools during that procurement process, which ethical criteria is required? And then like, how do we measure and score vendors fairly? I'd love to hear from you, Jaime, on this one.
Yeah, that's a nice, perfect segue to what Danielle was mentioning, is kind of life cycle, because when we take a look at OMB 2604, right, it's really about AI systems that are truthful and neutral, right? And it's about understanding those principles, and then how do we now turn that into cogent evaluation factors to ensure that we're actually getting that. And it goes beyond just compliance documentation, right? Because we have standard, regardless of whether it's AI or not, right? We put out requirements as government, and then the vendor community responds through a solicitation and says, I can do X, Y, Z. And for artificial intelligence, I mean, and this is what I've been saying for years before this really came to the fold, which is there has to be a show me, don't tell me approach to emerging technologies, which is really what I've been pounding away for years, and what I've been telling vendors, especially my last posting at the Department of State, for looking at programs for procurement, for innovation, for the department as a whole, which is vendors need to be very proactive in demonstrating that they can actually do these things, but through testing and through demonstration and being transparent. Because I certainly understand the desire to, what I like to say, shove licenses down your customer's throat to make quotas, and that's great. But at the end of the day, where's the user adoption, and where are you demonstrating that you're meeting the policy and the regs for ethical, and those guardrails are important? How are you doing that? So there needs to be a level of basic transparency. Vendors have to demonstrate how their AI works. How do you report problems? And that also now goes towards accountability. How do you monitor the AI deployment? Do you just deploy it and walk away? Or is there an opportunity now to continue to build? And to the point that Danielle was making, the entire supply chain needs to be brought into this, because is it just, okay, you buy, you walk away, or now is there real human oversight? And how do we now report problems and fix them? And how do we meet the requirements? Because we're assuming now that AI is a tool that's needed to solve a problem. And that was always my first question when people came up and say, hey, I wanted AI. So I'm like, okay, great. So, provide me the use case on how AI demonstrates value and utility via proper performance metrics. And that's the important evaluation criteria is, okay, so AI is not a shiny object. It's solving a problem, right? Whether it be to lower the procurement lead time or to lower the amount of documents reviewed, right? It's always about streamlining, speed, and agility. That's great. But it has to be done correctly, and more importantly, it has to be defendable, because there's a series of protests happening around AI being used. But if I can't explain to you how that AI was used, how the AI works, then that protest more than likely will get sustained to the point now where in procurement, right, we're not we don't take on a lot of risk in the procurement world. Actually, quite the opposite. It's a very risk-averse culture. So this needs to be solved, because AI is a false multiplier and a very important tool for procurement. And given the workforce situation, it's not getting any better anytime soon. And there really does need to be more happening with less. And AI is a great way to do that, but it has to be done smart. So vendors need to demonstrate actual test results, how they do this, right? Track record of responding to problems in deployment, clear specific answers to problems and user adoption, and of course the performance metrics. That umbrella of criteria and what you should be evaluating is critical to ensure that you are getting those proper guardrails and they're going to be using these tools effectively as designed. So that's very critical from a procurement standpoint.
Thank you, Jaime. Ron, I know you have some things to say on this topic as well.
Yeah, there's so much. I think Jaime, you laid a great, painted a really strong picture about how people should be thinking about this. And I'll try to be succinct. To start, I think what is important to just keep in mind for everyone that's evaluating, procuring an AI system or how you use it in your daily life, it's less of a calculator and more of a weather forecast, as I like to say it. It's non-deterministic, meaning you cannot guarantee a given output based on your inputs, right? So to that point, there are a couple of resources that I think, and the government's already begun looking at this, and I have done quite a bit of RMF work in cyber work in the past, and I think a place that people can look right now is NIST AI 100, NIST AI 600. even the international standard, ISO 42001 about AI systems, right? But those first two documents, I think, are important and worth a read for any acquisition professional, because they outline, some common sense stuff, and they go a little bit more in depth. But before I go into that, I want to talk about, a harness, like what you were talking about, Jaime. Standardization, can produce fairness, right? Having everyone play on the same playing field. And, to put it in perspective, every time you use Chat GPT or Claude or whatever, you're using a harness. You're not interacting directly with the model that they have in the lab, right? There is a harness on top of that, which adds safety guardrails, which adds all of the things that the frontier model companies, anyone that's building models, publishes when they publish safety reports, red teaming reports. There's a lot of that out there. You go to any of the major labs, they'll post model cards, they'll post red teaming findings, safety measures that they put in place. But as the consumer, you're interacting with a harness. So when it comes to federal agencies procuring AI, you also need a harness. And this outlines this. They have a whole framework. The documents are very prescriptive. But when you think about, measuring everything on the same playing field, what that really is just, a harness. So for example, I said, model cards, evaluations, everyone on the vendor side having access to the same rubric that things will be evaluated on. So if you have a capability, like Jaime said, okay, I want AI, but what do you want it for, right? What are you looking to achieve? So you have to build your harness, your evaluation harness around that. Right. So I'll stop there. I'm sure others would want to chime in, but.
Yeah, that was great. I know, Bennett, you've been nodding your head over. Do you want to jump in and add to this?
Yeah, I definitely love to jump in and kind of expanding on Ron's point. We also have to consider not just acquiring AI tools, but how AI tools are used in acquisitions and recognizing a lot of times, um, you know, as we see more on the vendor side, people are using AI to generate their documents they're submitting, and then they're editing or, making further, but AI is being involved in their process. And then we've started to see government leveraging LLMs in their acquisition side of things. And to me, one of the concerning things here is the risk that it becomes an arms race of, who can sink more money into LLMs to generate more and more good-looking documents or more complex technical, extremely long technical documents. And so I think it's important to also recognize the opportunity a lot of times of taking the opposite approach of really reducing the barriers to entry. And, when I was a presidential innovation fellow, I got to help write contracts, and work with agencies on acquisitions. And we took the approach with one agency of saying, we've done the market research. We recognize there's a good range of small businesses that could do this work. Why don't we make it more of a pass fail criteria? And then really focus the award based on oral presentations and discussions with a vendor, which let us directly evaluate their past performance, look at their demos, talk things through with them. And it avoided having to worry a lot about someone gaming the system and using a bunch of complicated AI, efforts to pass a bunch of complex technical requirements we wrote. And so I think it's something that we can all think about as we look at how it can have an impact, both as we try to acquire AI, but also as we try to layer AI into our operations.
Yeah, that's great. And that's like a perfect segue into just more questions about, what does ethical AI acquisition look like when balancing both that innovation, speed, and responsible testing, but like how also do we pilot requirements without creating barriers that only large vendors can meet or compete with, right? So Ron, I'd like to open that back up over to you on that topic.
Yeah, I'll continue where Bennett left off, right? Just specific to this. So you have, using AI in the acquisition process, and you have acquiring AI systems, right? So using AI in the acquisition process, to your point, Bennett, yeah, it can create an arms race. And then it's kind of like, well, have my AI talk to your AI, and then, who's validating the results, right? And that's where I go back to the harness concept, where, if you have all of the same criteria, the same rubric, it's open, it's transparent, then everyone is being measured by those same things. I forget the acronym, but I go back to the NIST thing. It's like map, measure, like manage. There's another one, and there's four phases to it. But if you have everyone singing to the same sheet of music, you can't game the system. It becomes impossible to game the system. And to your point, Bennett, and maybe I'm getting a little off topic here, but for the acquisition professionals, I would wonder, how do you all feel about, because I've heard a lot of talk about this, moving more towards oral presentations and demonstrations, cutting down protest, saving taxpayer dollars, saving time. I think it's a great idea. Show me, don't tell me, because anybody can write a beautiful document or a deck or even a beautiful presentation. That's easy now with AI, right? But the people that are delivering the work, that have the capability, the understanding, you want to talk to those people, make sure that they know what they're doing, right? And I think having the shared evaluation criteria for whatever the capability is that you're trying to to procure, it goes a long way there, and then you come in and you show us exactly how what you're proposing meets the need. And if it were me, I mean, yeah, document is cool, but I'm not going to read that. I want to see how it works because I understand how it works, which leads me to another point, the evaluators, right? You have the program folks that, they need the capability, but then you have technical evaluation. Having the right people at the table during that process, I think is pretty important. And making sure that they're involved in building that harness, that evaluation criteria, all the gates that go into that for whatever you're trying to, procure. And when it comes to well, I guess that goes the same way for AI systems. If you're buying an AI system or using AI to evaluate or build requirements, right? It's the same thing. So I think it really is a universal concept. And the other thing I think that was really important for folks to pay attention to is how the commercial sector is doing things. I'll go back to some of the research that's been published by Frontier Labs on safety, on auditability, and you don't know the inner workings of the model, but you do have traces, which are important to understand what the model did to do to get to a point that it got to. And without getting too technical, you can see some of that now with some of the frontier models or any of the models that are out there, and even the open models. And again, an important distinction there is that I don't know that there is an open source. I think, Owen, you mentioned this, an open source model. You have open weights where you can download, the weights, but you won't have the training data. So that really is not a thing right now, to my knowledge. So anyway, yeah, I see you have your hand up, Danielle. So let me pause for a moment.
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to say that, Danielle. Sounds like you might have something to add to this.
Yeah. To you, Ron, and to the whole group. One of the things that we haven't really talked about, there's two pieces. So it's only the AI and the technology is only as good as it's trained, is my understanding, right? And this is not necessarily a shared understanding amongst everyday folks that use the technology. So then that leads me to sort of data and what data goes in. I notice within GSA, as we explore all kinds of opportunities and listen to lots of vendors, and we're trying really hard to have that partnership with industry around the technology. Nobody's mentioning data on people and feeding competency-based data into the system. So I just wanted to raise that up. They're pulling lots from the regs and pasting, source data from all kinds of learning assets and things like that. But what about competency-based data for human learning and keeping it outcomes oriented in that way? What skills do people really need to do their jobs? Those are when I refer to competency data, that's what I'm talking about. So sharing that just for folks to munch on and consider. And then also training, as part of that process with NIST that you're referring to. I think a lot of places where things fall down is we all have the idea of, okay, well, we need a sample evaluation criteria for AI, right? We need a competency for the human using AI. Maybe those are two things that we can have a conversation about, but the in-between of getting, the policy and or the awareness into practice is that training gap. I know Jaime was mentioning that. And having a shared understanding, a lot of folks, when I talk about NIST, unfortunately, as it's great, but acquisitionizing NIST guidance, right, and understanding that there's that tailoring that needs to happen to create a shared understanding for these new cross-functional teams that we need. RFO and Revolutionary for Overhaul is part of that. So designing things that make sense with NIST, that make sense with the federal acquisition regulations that guide our procurement systems, and helping policy folks and designer technical folks understand the need for training for the decision makers who bear that risk as end users of those systems. So it's
Great.
just some thoughts.
Thanks, Danielle. Oh, and I'm sure you want to add to that comment about, the open models and how they're being built.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I did want to point out in response to Ron, there are actually some fully open models available. So there's one that was released last year by Apertus, called Apertus. I don't know how you pronounce it exactly. There's an older one called Bloom that is also, pretty well, probably more well known. But they're definitely, they're maybe not as bleeding edge as, the commercial models, but they are available. And certainly for a lot of tasks, you don't necessarily need the most bleeding edge model. You need something that's going to be simple and reliable and that you can understand. If it does something weird, you can go look in the training data. Why did it do that? Was there something that was causing that behavior? So yeah, if people are interested, I'd encourage you to go out and run these. It is getting easier and easier to spin up these models locally on your laptop or in a cloud system. Often you don't need to even have a server. You can just pick the model from a list. So good fun to play with.
Thanks for that, Owen. I'm gonna go to Jaime and come back to Ron. Jaime, I know you've been wanting to answer this question as well.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add a couple points. So I actively teach DITAP, which is the program for teaching these principles, right? Not just artificial intelligence, but emerging technologies and technologies itself. And one of the techniques that we talk about in the class and what I've been doing for years, I mean, pre-FAR 2.0, and this goes back to memos from 2011, which is breaking down requirements into smaller testable increments and then using modular procurement, modular contracting to do that, to create MVPs and to create real capability without the base +4 model, which now lowers barriers to entry. We were doing this at IRS, which, if for you doing your taxes, right, you still have forms all over the place. So you don't really think of IRS as a very innovative, forward-leaning agency, although they're doing a lot of great things. And certainly the pilot IRS program that we were working on is one of them, where we're awarding prototypes and MVPs to several companies to do everything we're talking about, which is to test things, break things, provide real capability to multiple vendors. I think 90 some odd % of the awards that we made were to non-traditional contractors, first-time awardees, small businesses, usually within 30 days. So, I mean, that's speed to market right there about what industry is doing. And of course, we set up very good communications with the requirements office to ensure that we had performance-based gating, right? We put together different gates, and if you meet the requirements and the capability and we're good to go, we can go to phase 2 and continue development with the hope, of course, of creating a product in the end that we can now put into production. So kind of like the gap that we hear about actual creating technology and that valley of death, we solved up front because we were actually baking that into the actual contract. And these are the types of techniques that not only that I'm teaching, but also would coach procurement professionals to do it, because a lot of folks don't have a lot of experience doing this. But I would also teach and recommend to vendors that they do these approaches. Because obviously the base plus four model is the way we do business, but this is a new innovative way of doing business that can be more beneficial to you to get new business, increase the aperture for different types of agency use, but also to take a look at, hey, look, we do all these things, right? All the things that we talked about, all the guardrails, right? The forward leaning, and it's just another way of thinking about how to acquire IT, but certainly for artificial intelligence and the types of things that government needs to be doing more of. And of course, like what Bennett was saying, using oral presentations, getting rid of paper, really more of a show me, don't tell me model. And it's very effective, and certainly FAR 2.0. And the more use of FAR Part 12 for commercial items is at the forefront of that. So hopefully we'll be seeing more of that in the short term, but also in the long term.
Thank you for that, Jaime. Ron, I did see you have your hand up and you put it back down. Did you want to round out the question at all?
Yeah, I just wanted to connect some dots. I mean, Owen, thanks for sharing this. The Bloom, project is super cool, and I couldn't help but think or wonder, just throw it out there, based on what you were saying, Danielle, about feeding data into a model, because that's important as well, right? I'm wondering if any of you know of any initiatives by federal agencies, to train models, or if that's something that's coming up in conversation. It's it's resource intensive, obviously, but that's something I wanted to throw out there, because when you said, Daniel, it made a lot of sense, and obviously Owen sharing that is like that's pretty cool to see. The open source community is not only just providing the open weight models, but also having the training data with it is good to know. So the open question, really, I have no idea, but seems like something that someone may already be working on or should be working on.
I'll say this really briefly to it, because I think it segues into where we're headed, Liz. But such a great question, Ron. Thanks for just being curious about it. It's so funny as we look to AI to help us be better humans in so many ways, right? Oversimplifying, of course, we're coming back to understanding being human even more. So what I'm finding in the training spaces is this is just as much a revolutionary moment in the adult learning space as it is in the technology space. The more that we can, define skills and think about how to grow people, which goes back to all kinds of human capital development initiatives that are incredibly important, the more we're going to be better at using and equipping our workforces with the technology. And we're just to the point where people are starting to realize that capturing skills and measuring employee development and growth, rethinking how we train our workforces is even a priority. We've never been a priority. Training typically, historically, is the last thing to get funding and the first thing to get cut. Jaime knows I'm in these spaces as well. And we're seeing, wow, we need to be apprenticeship training our people to make these high level critical thinking decisions around how do I evaluate these 10 amazing proposals and consider ethics. Okay, well, what is ethics, and what does that mean in terms of, data transparency, in terms of bias, in terms of the way that they're trained? Putting actual words to that is an art and a whole career field, to get to the best set of evaluation criteria. And so the AI can help, but it's only going to be as good as our data that we give it on the skill sets and the nuances that we need and know as procurement professionals. So it's kind of this circular thing, and I'm just really excited that we're all talking and connecting the dots in this way. So we got to work on it together.
Yeah, thanks for that, Danielle. And this, I'm actually going to switch up the question order a little bit, because this is a great segue, and I know we haven't heard much from Joel, and I'd love to give you some airtime, Joel. Like specifically, if we're serious about making ethical AI the rule, right? Not just as nice to have or an add-on. What standards, toolkits, or SLAs would actually make a difference?
Yeah, I've been violently nodding my head, because it seems, connecting the dots, it all starts with the data, right? Garbage in, hallucinations out, right? And yes, of course, we get all these leading edge models. We don't really know the training data, but there are options, like Owen pointed out, where we can actually have a say in what data they train on. So yeah, I mean, the good thing about this is there's been a lot of work in this space. I don't know. I'm sure people are familiar, if this community is familiar with FAIR data, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable data, as part of the Evidence Act. No, that was passed by President Trump in 2019 before this big craze about AI. And it so happens that we're starting to implement it. And the great thing about FAIR data is it's not only reproducible and auditable data, it is AI ready data. That's our claim. Because these models, you don't want to give them just the raw data, millions and millions of rows. I mean, the government is one of the largest producers, if not the largest producer of data, right? What if we extract the high resolution, high quality metadata, and that's what we train the models with? And then that way you can have that audit trail, that reproducibility that people are talking about. I mean, we've been doing experiments in this space where we use the AI where it's good at, the creativity and connecting the dots. And then we ask it, oh, I have this question, create a Python notebook to answer this question, or create a SQL query to answer this question. And then it's reproducible, right? And then you don't have to send all that sensitive data to the model or for the, across the cloud. So yeah, and then in terms of of of, of other standards, there's a lot of movement too in the space apart from DCAT. I'm sure everybody, I don't know if everybody's familiar with DCAT. It's a way of describing data in a machine readable way. Now there's also some movement in other standards bodies for something called croissant, which is targeted to machine learning use cases. And what we found is as people start implementing the Evidence Act, is we are also starting to, as it happens, the White House prioritized just last year the AI Action Plan and the Genesis mission. Now, how do we produce scientific data sets? You don't do it by redoing the experiments. You do it by describing the data sets that you already have in a robust, rigorous way. So you have the traceability and you have the reproducibility. So yeah, AI cannot be ethical, as Liz pointed out. It's so the burden of making it ethical, I think, is on the human, the curator in the loop, right? That we are fair, that we are producing fair data, we're complying with the Evidence Act, we're describing our data holdings in such a way that we can reproduce and trace the answers. Yep.
Great. Thanks for that, Joel. So I want to move on to a slightly, still related to all this, but slightly different topic. And this was actually a question that was submitted in advance of this talk today. And it's about accessibility. So, how do we pull accessibility into the center of this AI conversation? And this is not just about folks using assistive tech to interact or trust these systems. It's also about ensuring everything AI creates is genuinely accessible and free from ableist bias. Owen, I'd love to hear from you on this one.
Yeah, and I think, if people are not familiar with accessibility, it's really important framing to just think about all the different types of accessibility challenges that people might experience, right? Both obviously visible ones that might be, someone in a wheelchair, fairly stereotypical, right? But there's also a lot of ones that are less visible, and they can show up in a lot of different ways. And every person really is unique, right? I think that's the key. And and AI fundamentally, most AI systems work broadly on averages, right? They're going to try and come up with the solution that is the most best fits the training data that it's seen. And most of the training data it's seen will not be about people with disabilities, right? And so I think, if you prompt, example here, if you just prompt a large language model like ChatGPT for a short story, it's very unlikely to randomly feature someone with a disability, right? And so, that's an example. But the way this can show up is a lot of different ways. And I think the challenge is that they can be quite subtle and they can be hard to detect and anticipate, right? Web forms, we know web forms. If a new developer, if you take someone right out of high school and they build a web form, probably it's going to have accessibility issues, right? But we understand those accessibility issues. The federal government in particular, a lot of agencies have really strong accessibility programs. We know how to address these issues and make web forms that we know through, decades of trial and error, we know are accessible, right? And so, the challenges for AI systems, we don't know those. And I should say, right, there are a lot of potential benefits to AI as well for people with disabilities, right? I mean, I think the ability to interact with a system in different ways, in ways that might be easier to them, right? Some people filling in a form might be very challenging and annoying, but a chatbot might actually be a lot easier, right? And so, or support for people who are building those systems, right? So maybe if you're working on content for a website, having feedback for those editors to help them make sure that what they're writing is easy to understand for everybody, right? So there's a lot of like really amazing things that AI can be used to help support people with disabilities, but there are challenges. And I think like you're going back to that chat interface, we don't know, it's very hard to test and know how an AI will respond in all the different cases of people with disabilities. Like, will they be able to understand the voice that the output the AI is using? How is the AI writing? And will the way that they type be able to be interpreted by the AI? And a lot of the time it probably will, right? Like AIs can be pretty good. They're pretty smart. A typo is not going to throw it off. You can tell it to use plain language. But really the main issue is like, because the space is so new, we don't have those kind of practices to be able to get assurance that these AI systems are accessible, right? And that can happen whether it's the AI system, something people is interacting with, or something if it's more in the back end, right? If it's processing a form, it may not respond well to like slight input differences that someone with a assistive technology might use in the form, where like a well-trained, experienced human would be just more adaptable. They'd be able to like understand the context, what this person was intending. They might even call them up, right? An AI is not going to do that. An AI is probably going to be like, big fat denied stamp or whatever. And if there's not any human in the loop, that might not never ever be caught, right? And so I think this is where it gets challenging. It's as much the like the things we don't know. And how do we get that confidence that the system is accessible? If we can figure that out, potentially it could be much more accessible than the web forms we're using now for a lot of people. But how do we get there? It's a challenge.
Thanks for that, Owen. Danielle, I see you have some things to say about this question as well.
I'll try to be brief. I mean, I think it's going back to, so in the government, we have 508 testers, related to accessibility. And that's a really good example to follow. Having somebody in the room who can actually represent for that community, and those nuances, and then making sure that you acquire the technology with that in mind, right? You have to integrate it through the life cycle. So that's another ethical guardrail that you could consider. So don't assume that you can figure that out in your own testing. Make sure you have that representation, and that skill set to train on and test the AI and how it's actually doing for people who use screen readers, for people who cannot see or hear, and is it plain language enough to prompt those other technologies in the right way? And that goes back to me to thinking about AI and ethics as an embodiment versus how we actually like operate it into and integrate it into the practitioner spaces. So we need guardrails. We all need to come together in these cross-functional teams to set up the ways that we're going to measure this stuff, and hold it accountable, and make sure that the AI and the end user are interacting in ways that make sense and are producing really great procurement outcomes. And so setting up those metrics together, I think, is just going to be a really big part of operationalizing ethics.
That's great. So this is our last question before we close things out today. And I want to open this up to, anyone in the group who wants to speak on this. I definitely saw some like aha moments, like as we were discussing, lots of like head nodding. And I don't think we can fully define ethical AI. We've got lots of ideas, right? Like a lot of ways that we can take this based on how we talk. But like I'm gonna put this out to the group here, like based on the conversation today. Where do we think this is heading?
Yeah, and I'd love to jump in here. Because a lot of, especially with our great conversation today, I think one of my key takeaways here is really thinking about the incentives, where when we go to build an AI solution or incorporate AI into an existing process, I think a lot of times we have to think about like, consider the impact at scale. What will happen if what you're building is wildly successful and it scales and it, becomes, fully utilized across like a wide enterprise use case? Um, and like, what will the impact be? Like, are the incentives aligned towards, good outcomes that everyone involved is happy with or not? A good example, I've worked a lot in the Veterans Affairs space and, claims processing for disability benefits as well as like healthcare benefits. If, if, for example, we built an AI solution that rapidly denied claims and flagged any sort of mistakes and just denied them, that would overall have a negative impact. It would create a new barrier, and it would, if it was scaled up, it would shift and create more burden towards the public that's trying to use it. If we took the same problem set of we're trying to increase efficiency and we built an AI solution that helps flag people's mistakes in a human in the loop interaction and helps them get it right the first time, so they provide the right information or they don't forget to check a box, etc., we could accomplish the same goal of increasing efficiency, but we'd be aligning the AI towards accomplishing the goal in a way that increases the efficiency without creating a new burden on the public. And I think as we think about the incentives of how we're incentivizing it, that's where like my rough definition of like thinking about AI not as it's not like a machine that's good or bad. It's a system that, as people were talking about today, I took notes, it's a system designed to be verifiable, accountable, and aligned with public interest standards. And if we can hold that definition, say, whatever I'm building, is it aligned to those values? That's where I feel like we can, potentially like it's a starting point to have that further discussion and refinement.
Joel.
Yeah, I just want to respond to that. I mean, sometimes when we talk about standards, we talk about technical standards, in terms of how to put things together. But also, to Bennett's point, we need to hold up the standard too of to what end are we building the systems? Because if you deny those claims, somebody might say that's a success for us, right? Because now I don't have to pay those claims. But if the standard is if your ultimate stakeholder is the citizenship, the citizenry, then you're actually failing and delivering up to that higher standard. So standards is not just the technical standards of DCAD, croissant. I think we need to also think about, what is that public, who is the main stakeholder that we're serving?
Yeah, I love that. Do you have another comment there, Ron?
No, I wanted to toss something out there, and around applying those standards. What you said, Joel, and you too, Bennett. I mean, specifically when it comes to web accessibility, building, computer-based systems, there are some great contributions from the open source community, for WCAGs and WCAG guidelines, pulling those rules and augmenting the harness that you might be using to code, right? For example, to help steer it a little bit better, to look out for things, common things that that a person that's building writing the code, or even another agent may miss, making sure that you can't, again, it's not deterministic, but you can try to steer a model into doing those things. So I'm wondering, for in the broader context, because we're not just talking about web applications, AI's in everything. I mean, you look at Tesla, full self-driving and all that. I'm wondering, just something to think about, right? In the broader community, pulling those kinds of standards from the public, right, to help inform how we steer any application that's built with AI, or whether we're putting AI in a human interface, human computer interface, or if it's in a drone, or if it's in a sensor in your house, or whatever the case may be. That's an interesting thought, getting more or less information from the field. And, I know a lot of these models are, pre-trained, but then you have reinforcement learning from human feedback. I think, Bennett, we may have worked on that same project you're talking about at the VA. Is it VIX? Is that right?
I wrote the VIX contract back when I was a Fed at the VA.
Okay. So I was at IBM when we delivered it. So what Bennett was talking about, like, we did a lot of work with, human in the loop, making sure that, the human can say, okay, that was a good job, AI. To your point, Liz, about, optimizing for a specific outcome, the AI so giving a dog a treat is akin to telling an AI good job. Like, it mostly wants to please the human, it please the user, right? There are emergent behaviors, around self-preservation, but you can work through that with some of the safety rules and red teaming that the labs are doing. But reinforcing, hey, you did a good job there. It's like, okay, well, next time when I see this specific instance, the same scenario, we'll do the same thing, or we'll try to replicate the same behavior, right? So I'm oversimplifying it by far, but that's a good analogy. So anyway, yeah, I'm just wondering, in the future, you said, where does this go? Well, when your Nest thermostat, it learns that, hey, you turn it down or up a few degrees every time, and maybe they already do this, but maybe it starts saying, okay, well, this is guidance from the human. Maybe I should just automatically, set the thermostat to this temperature. Again, a super oversimplification for complex systems, but that's something I see that could be, really, we see more common, or maybe it's already happened all around us and we just don't know it yet.
Yeah. I'd love to open it up, and this is probably going to be a hard one to answer, but like, does someone have like a one sentence definition of ethical AI that they're going to take with them once we leave this call? Joel? Oh, you're muted, Joel. You're still muted, Joel.
There you go.
There you go.
Right. For me, ethical, as we all establish, just setting up the one sentence, AI cannot be ethical. And it's basically on us, the people who build it and deploy it, who need to apply, who need to be ethical. It's up to us.
Thanks for that, Joel. And thank you all for your time today. I love this conversation. I learned a lot of new information. I had all these like things that I wanted to jump in on that I was like, nope, it's not about me, but I will carry those conversations forward in my work. I'm sure people who are watching this video will have conversations as well. The big thing I would just recommend is encourage you to just keep learning, keep talking, keep sharing. That's how we get better. And like we said, the real challenge is not about making the AI ethical. It's about the people and putting in place those guardrails. It really comes down to how we design, govern, and oversee these tools and the people that that are using these tools. So we just thank you all, and thanks for your time.
Thank you guys for having
Thanks,
us.
everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Nice to
This
meet
was
all of
great.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Take care.
Take care.
Good conversation.
Bye, Al.
I'm
Bye.
gonna stop the recording.
Yeah.
Okay.